Your soulmate's family was talking about you all night. Then everything changed. My beloved child, don't scroll away just yet, because what unfolded while the stars filled the sky was never meant to remain hidden forever. Somewhere, behind closed doors, in a home you have never entered, your name was spoken again and again. Not by strangers. Not by passing thoughts. But by the people whose opinions have quietly shaped someone else's future for years. What began as an ordinary evening became something no one expected. One sentence led to another. One memory unlocked another. And before the night was over, the atmosphere inside that house had completely changed. Stay with this story, because every moment reveals another piece of a puzzle that has been forming long before today. At first, no one noticed how naturally the conversation drifted toward you. It wasn't planned. There was no announcement. Someone mentioned a small moment. Another person remembered something they had once overlooked. A quiet smile appeared across the table. Then another voice joined in. Soon, everyone seemed to have something to say. Strange, isn't it? Sometimes the most important conversations begin without anyone realizing their significance. Your soulmate remained unusually silent at first. They listened carefully as every opinion filled the room. They heard stories you never knew existed. Tiny details you thought no one remembered suddenly became the center of attention. Even the smallest kindness you once showed seemed larger now, as though time itself had been saving those moments for this exact night. But here's where everything became different. Instead of ending with uncertainty, the conversation kept moving toward clarity. Every question that had once created hesitation slowly began finding an answer. Every misunderstanding that had lingered quietly in the background started losing its power. No arguments. No dramatic confrontation. Just something much stronger, a gradual realization spreading from one heart to another. Pause for a second and imagine this. What if people were discussing your future while you were completely unaware? What if doors were opening in conversations you never expected to happen? Sometimes life changes in rooms we've never entered, through words we've never heard, carried by people we'll never even meet. Yet somehow, those unseen moments shape the next chapter waiting for us. As the evening continued, one family member finally asked the question everyone had been quietly avoiding. What is it about this person that keeps coming back into our conversations? Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The meaningful kind. Because suddenly nobody rushed to answer. Each person looked toward your soulmate. And for the first time that night, they lifted their head with complete honesty shining across their face. No rehearsed speech. No perfect explanation. Just something deeply genuine. They admitted that every attempt to move forward without thinking about you had somehow led them back to the same place. They described how ordinary days felt strangely incomplete. How certain songs, familiar streets, random conversations, and quiet evenings all carried tiny reminders they could never fully explain. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. Instead, something unexpected happened. Understanding replaced doubt. Curiosity replaced assumptions. Even those who had once questioned everything began seeing the situation through completely different eyes. Stay a little longer. Because what happened after this changed the entire direction of the night. One older voice softly spoke words that instantly filled the room with emotion. Sometimes life keeps bringing the same person back into your thoughts because the story isn't finished. No one argued. Those words simply settled into everyone's heart. Your soulmate looked down for a moment, almost overwhelmed by hearing someone else say what they had secretly felt for so long. It wasn't about fantasy. It wasn't about impossible promises. It was about recognizing that some connections continue asking to be understood until both people are finally ready to listen. Outside, the night grew quieter. Inside, something invisible kept growing stronger. The conversation was no longer about whether you mattered. That question had already answered itself. Now everyone wanted to know something entirely different. What happens next? And that single question would lead to the most unexpected moment of the entire evening. But before that answer revealed itself, another person at the table quietly reached for something that no one expected, and the instant they placed it in the center of the room, every face turned toward it in complete silence. That was the exact moment everything began to change. A single quiet action can change the direction of an entire evening, and that is exactly what happened next. No one expected it. No one saw it coming. The room, once filled with gentle conversation, suddenly became completely still. The family member who had been listening more than speaking slowly placed an old photo album on the table. Not because anyone had asked for it, but because something inside them felt it was the right moment. Your soulmate looked surprised. "What are you doing?" they asked with a nervous smile. The answer came softly. Sometimes we need to remember how the heart has been speaking long before the mind finally catches up. The album opened. Page after page revealed moments from different seasons of life. Birthdays. Family gatherings. Quiet celebrations. Smiles frozen in time. Yet something unexpected happened as everyone turned the pages together. Instead of talking about the photographs themselves, they began talking about change, about growth. About the people who unexpectedly entered someone's life and quietly transformed the way they saw the future. Then one person looked directly at your soulmate. "You've changed." The words were simple. But they carried extraordinary weight. "You smile differently now. You listen more. You've become calmer. You seem hopeful again." No one had noticed these little changes until that very moment. But once they were spoken aloud, everyone could see them clearly. Your soulmate didn't know how to respond. Because deep inside, they already knew exactly what those changes were connected to. Not because someone forced them. Not because anyone convinced them. But because every time your name quietly crossed their mind, something inside them felt lighter than before. Have you ever wondered whether your presence could influence someone without you even realizing it? Sometimes people think impact only comes through grand gestures. Yet life often works differently. A single conversation. One act of kindness. One honest moment. Those things echo much longer than anyone expects. Stay with this for just a little longer. The night was only beginning to reveal its true purpose. One by one, every family member started sharing something they had never mentioned before. I noticed the way you talk about them. I noticed you stopped pretending you didn't care. I noticed you became happier after that conversation. I noticed your eyes light up whenever hope enters the discussion. Your soulmate remained silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because hearing other people describe feelings they had tried to hide was almost overwhelming. Then came the moment that shifted everything. The oldest person in the room gently smiled and said, "You don't spend this much time thinking about someone unless they have already become part of your future in some way." The room became still again. Nobody rushed to explain. Nobody laughed it away. Everyone simply reflected on those words. And strangely, those words seemed to answer questions no one had managed to put into sentences before. If this story is speaking to your heart, I'd love to know what part connected with you the most. You can share your thoughts below, and if these stories inspire your journey, you're always welcome to stay connected by subscribing for more moments like this. The conversation no longer felt like ordinary family discussion. It felt like people were slowly uncovering pieces of a picture that had been hidden in plain sight all along. Then something remarkable happened. Your soulmate quietly admitted something they had never spoken aloud. I kept trying to convince myself that I should stop thinking about them. They paused. But every time I believed I had moved on, life found another way to remind me. No dramatic music. No impossible coincidence. Just honest reflection. One family member leaned forward with genuine curiosity. "So what are you waiting for?" That question lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Because suddenly everyone realized the conversation was no longer about the past. It had become completely focused on tomorrow. Outside, the first light of a new morning was beginning to touch the horizon. Inside, every heart sensed that the next decision would matter more than every conversation that came before it. Yet before anyone could suggest what should happen next, a phone resting quietly on the table suddenly lit up with a notification. Your soulmate looked at the screen. Their expression changed instantly. No one in the room said a single word. Because whatever appeared on that screen seemed to answer a question they hadn't even asked yet. And in that unforgettable moment, everyone understood that the story was far from over. Before anyone could ask what had appeared on the screen, your soulmate slowly locked the phone and placed it face down on the table. No panic. No rush. Just a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of everything they had been feeling for so long. Everyone noticed. No one interrupted. Because sometimes silence tells a bigger story than words ever could. One family member finally smiled and said, "Whatever you just saw, it wasn't the notification that changed your face. It was what it reminded you of." Those words settled into the room like the first light of dawn breaking through a quiet window. Your soulmate looked around at every familiar face. For years, these were the people whose advice mattered most. The people who celebrated every victory, questioned every difficult choice, and always hoped to protect them from disappointment. Yet tonight felt different. For the first time, they weren't asking whether you were the right person. They were asking what was stopping the next chapter from beginning. Think about that for a moment. How often does life quietly rearrange people's opinions without anyone realizing it? Not through arguments. Not through persuasion. But through time. Through growth, and through the undeniable feeling that some connections continue to return because they still have something meaningful to reveal. Your soulmate finally spoke. I've spent too much time waiting for certainty. Another pause. Maybe certainty doesn't arrive first. Maybe it grows after someone is brave enough to take one honest step. The room remained completely still. Those words weren't dramatic. They were real. And somehow, everyone could feel the difference. Then the oldest voice in the family gently nodded. Every meaningful journey begins that way. No one had expected the evening to end with encouragement. Hours earlier, everyone had different opinions, different questions, different assumptions. But now, those scattered thoughts had become one shared understanding. The conversation had changed. The atmosphere had changed. Even your soulmate had changed. Stay with this until the very end, because the final piece of this night is closer than you think. As everyone began clearing the table, something unusual happened. Instead of returning to ordinary conversations, people continued speaking about possibilities. What if the timing is finally right? What if this season is different from every season before it? What if the moments we've all been noticing are leading somewhere important? No one claimed to know the future. Yet hope had quietly taken the place where uncertainty once lived. Your soulmate walked toward the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to brighten. A brand new day was arriving. They stood there for a long moment, reflecting on everything that had been said. Every memory shared. Every encouraging word. Every unexpected realization. Then, almost without thinking, they smiled. Not because every question had been answered, but because they no longer felt alone in carrying those questions. Sometimes the greatest turning point isn't when life changes around you. It's when your heart becomes ready to welcome whatever comes next. As your soulmate turned back toward their family, one final sentence echoed through the room. Whatever happens from here, someone said warmly, don't let fear make the decision for you. Those words stayed with everyone. Because they weren't just advice for one person. They were a reminder that the most meaningful chapters often begin with quiet courage rather than perfect certainty. The night that started with simple conversation had become something unforgettable. Your name had brought reflection. Reflection had become understanding. Understanding had become hope. And hope had opened the door to a future that suddenly felt closer than ever before. The story was never really about one conversation. It was about the moment an entire room began seeing the same possibility through different eyes. And perhaps, somewhere in your own journey, this is your reminder that the conversations you cannot hear are not always working against you. Sometimes, they are quietly preparing the path ahead, one heartfelt word at a time. The sunrise had arrived, but no one hurried to leave the conversation behind. Somehow, the night had planted a question that refused to disappear. Even after breakfast was prepared, even after chairs were pushed back into place, everyone carried the same quiet feeling, that something meaningful had begun, and it deserved one final moment of honesty. Your soulmate stepped outside onto the porch, carrying nothing except their thoughts. The morning air felt different. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because they had. For the first time in a long while, they stopped asking themselves, "What if this never happens?" Instead, a completely new question entered their heart. What if I've been standing one step away from a beautiful new beginning all along? That single thought changed everything. Behind them, a family member quietly joined them without saying a word. They stood side by side, watching the sunlight slowly cover the trees. Then came a sentence that your soulmate would never forget. "You know," they said with a gentle smile, "last night wasn't really about convincing anyone. It was about helping everyone finally see what has been quietly growing in your heart." Those words felt like the missing piece of the entire evening. Your soulmate nodded. Every doubt that had once seemed enormous now appeared much smaller. Not because every answer had arrived, but because they had stopped carrying those questions alone. Have you ever noticed that the biggest turning points rarely happen with loud announcements? Most of the time, they arrive softly. A conversation. A realization. A peaceful decision. And before you know it, your future begins moving in a direction you never expected. Wait until this final moment. Because the story isn't ending with a promise. It's ending with a choice. As everyone gathered one last time before starting the day, someone looked directly at your soulmate and asked, "So, if another opportunity appeared today, would you finally listen to your heart instead of your fear?" This time, there was no hesitation. Your soulmate smiled. A real smile. The kind that doesn't need explanation. "I think I would." The room filled with quiet happiness. Not excitement. Not celebration. Just the peaceful feeling that comes when someone finally becomes honest with themselves. Sometimes that's the greatest victory of all. If this journey has stayed with you until now, thank you for being part of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if stories like these bring hope and inspiration to your day, you're always welcome to subscribe and continue this journey with us. As the morning continued, your soulmate glanced at their phone one final time. The screen was still there. The notification had faded. But the courage it awakened had not. Because they finally understood something that had taken far longer than a single night to learn. The most important change had never happened inside that family discussion. It happened inside their own heart. And perhaps that's why everything changed. Not because destiny shouted. Not because life forced an answer. But because one honest conversation gave someone the confidence to stop running from what truly mattered. So if this story found you today, maybe its purpose wasn't to predict tomorrow. Maybe it was simply to remind you that meaningful connections are built through sincerity, patience, and the courage to take the next step when the time feels right. And sometimes, the conversation that changes your future is the one you never knew was happening. Long after the conversations had ended and the house had grown quiet again, one feeling refused to fade. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't uncertainty. It was something far more powerful, a quiet confidence that the story had finally begun moving in the direction it was always meant to go. Your soulmate sat alone for a few moments before starting the day. No distractions. No noise. Just one simple realization echoing in their mind. Everything changed the moment I stopped hiding from what I truly felt. That thought stayed with them. Not because someone else had spoken it, but because it had finally become their own truth. Sometimes we spend so much time waiting for the perfect sign that we overlook the countless small moments already pointing us forward. Last night's conversation wasn't magical because every question was answered. It was meaningful because every heart became more open than it had been before. And perhaps that's how life's biggest changes often begin. Not with certainty, but with understanding. Not with guarantees, but with courage. As your soulmate looked toward the horizon, they quietly smiled, not because they knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, but because they were finally ready to welcome whatever came next with honesty instead of hesitation. Meanwhile, the family carried that same peaceful feeling throughout the day. Every person who had taken part in the conversation seemed lighter. They no longer spoke about possibilities with doubt. They spoke about them with hope. One family member even said something that perfectly captured the meaning of the entire night. Sometimes the right person doesn't arrive to change your life overnight. They arrive to change the way you see your future. Those words stayed with everyone. Because deep down, they knew they were true. Before this story comes to its final moment, remember this. Not every important conversation happens where you can hear it. Not every opportunity announces itself with great fanfare. Sometimes life quietly prepares hearts behind the scenes, allowing understanding to grow naturally until the perfect moment arrives. If you've listened from beginning to end, then perhaps this message reached you for a reason. Maybe it's a reminder to remain patient. Maybe it's an invitation to keep your heart open.